Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Launchpads Pick and Mix podcast. And today we have, as I seem to say each guest, the incredible Sarah Cottinghatt. And we were just joking offline before we started about how we both are kind of like, well, people listen to this, and we're like, I don't care. I mean, we'll just have a chat and we'll record it, and both of us just want to kind of geek out and talk to each other. So I hope that you guys get something out of this along the way. But yeah, we've got a private victory in mind in that we're just gonna enjoy talking to each other, really. So yeah, let me just share my screen and then we can get the slides up. As you know, we typically use the same structure for all of this. Cool. All right, here we go. So as I said, yeah, welcome to Sarah, who, I'm on the wrong slide. There's a bit of, let's try that instead. That's better. Nice huge picture of you. I'm sure you'll love that. So Sarah, we're going to get started on this and we can learn a bit more about her. So let's do this. So here we go. So tell us a bit about what your job is then now.
I've got the best job in the world, I think. Don't want to brag, but I'm very lucky. I basically get to work with schools to help them improve their professional development, particularly around instructional coaching. But like sometimes it's like working with people who are quite high up in trusts who are like, we just need to work out what our plan is for PD and it needs to fit with our principles and our values. And I get to chat with them and they've got a whole wealth of experience and do some kind of like leadership coaching with them. So yeah, it's really, really varied, really fun. Get to run some coaching programs and just generally think a lot about professional development.
Amazing. Of course, that wasn't what you always used to do. So, tell us a bit about before and then why you kind of chose to do that.
So I was an English teacher, and then I started training teachers, so having the responsibility for training teachers. And I just loved training teachers. And I went to work for Teach First so that I could train brand new teachers. And I just loved it because I think so many people say this, so it's probably going to sound really kind of old hat now, but people like I was a bit of a bee in my bonnet about the way I was trained as a teacher, and everybody says this, don't they? And like you almost like don't realize you've got a bee in your bonnet about it until you see how it could be done better, and then you're like, I wish that I'd been trained like that.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those jobs, isn't it, where you can quite easily feel like you're letting kids down and they only have one shot.
Oh God, yeah.
So the stakes are high, and I look back at some of the lessons I taught. I know we all have this. Like you look back and you're like, oh, you can't beat yourself up about it too much, but what you can do is try to sort of right those wrongs by giving, in my case with these Teach First teachers, Chris, like these brand new teachers who are about to go into very challenging contexts sometimes. Which, novice plus challenging context, not always the easiest thing to deal with. But Teach First revamped their training, and they like recruited a whole new role group. So I started as part of that role group. I was trained by brilliant people. For example, Chris Bolton was kind of designing the training for my role group.
Yeah, nice.
And oh my God, Chris, it was amazing. Like we learned about cognitive science. That was my first kind of foray into what memory is and why it's important. I'm not even sure I thought that much about memory when I was a teacher. Which is bonkers, isn't it?
It is absolutely bonkers. When I talk to my mum and I said, she says, "Oh, what are you doing? What's fresh?" And this is a couple. I said, "Oh, we're now integrating more about how we actually learn in the brain." She's like, "Should you not have been doing that the whole time?"
I feel like we always have to like put that to one side, and we just feel a bit too guilty about it. But yeah, so that was kind of where I got into teacher training, and teaching brand new teachers was fascinating. And I actually had a portfolio of like I don't know, 20 odd teachers every year, and I was going into something like 7 different schools every
Yeah.
year. So I was like going into these schools and seeing all these different contexts that you just don't get when you work in one school, do you? So that was fascinating. How are different schools run? What are the problems and successes in different contexts? That was absolutely fascinating. And I stuck with some of the same schools, Chris. So I was like seeing them year by year,
Yeah, that's great.
which was just absolutely fascinating. And some schools were like getting things right in really challenging circumstances. Some schools were really struggling for various reasons. So that was that. And then I moved to working at Ambition, which was largely designing coaching programs for trusts, which was fascinating as well. Like Oasis,
Yeah,
did a
nice.
coaching program with them, which worked with Josh Goodrich on that. So that was really fun. And then obviously we moved into like big programs, like
Yeah.
the Early Career Framework came out. We also had MVQs. So then it was designing bigger programs. And that was really fun from a kind of scale perspective.
Yeah.
You're not at the coalface, are you? People are delivering those big programs. You're not really delivering them. So that was really, really good. And I must say, the people at Ambition, you will not find a harder working group of people in professional development.
I'm a,
They
I'm a
are
big fan of
fantastic.
Ambition. We use Ambition for all of our kind of trust-wide stuff. Well, that's brilliant. And so we've done a bit of the kind of the how of how your kind of week works and all that stuff. So we'll skip that one. But as people that are new to the podcast, we typically have a sort of standard flow which has these kind of punctuation points along the line. And Sarah's done some prep beforehand in picking some pictures, picking some launch pads, and picking some ignition points from her life that she's going to talk a bit about. And so the first one is this what we call a fast friends question. They're kind of, I don't know, sensitive or vulnerable questions that are used to help people connect. And we can learn a bit more about, Sarah behind the scenes. So this was the first question she chose. If she could wake up tomorrow having gained one quality or ability, what would it be? So Sarah, what would that be?
Yeah, I actually forgot to prepare the answers properly for this. I just realised I was like, I've got my launch pads sorted, but
Yes.
so
Well,
if I could
even
wake up
better then.
tomorrow
This is
having,
straight off the cuff then.
yeah, I should get into
What are you going
one.
to do? What would you do if you could wake up tomorrow?
Okay, I'll tell you what it is. If
Oh,
I'm going to be completely honest, Chris,
that's what we
because
need.
I'm assuming that nobody is going to look at a podcast and think Sarah Cottinghatt. I'm going to listen to this, so it's just me and you having this
Exactly.
conversation.
Completely private.
I would gain the ability to feel comfortable in talking to anyone. So I think I get quite socially anxious. And I think it holds me back because I'd like to get to know anyone I sit next to. And I see people, people I know, like my brother, for example, who's very good. He can sit next to a 90-year-old or a 9-year-old and have a conversation with them that's
Yeah.
like really interesting.
Yeah.
And so I think the ability to have those kind of conversations with anybody and feel like, you know, confident and
Yeah.
comfortable
Well,
would
that's really
be
good. And I think,
my ability.
like most things, you're not going to be alone in that. And it's interesting teaching, isn't it? Because it is almost a performative kind of thing. And yet most of us have to turn that on. I was only talking to my daughter yesterday about how, however grumpy I feel prior to a presentation, I need to turn the switch because people don't need to, and however anxious I feel or unconfident I feel, I need to turn the switch because, that's not, I know that's not going to help me. But it doesn't take it away, which is fascinating. All
But
right. That's a
but
good.
I feel like you've got this quality, or at least from what I've seen. Like when I first met you, I didn't know you at all, and you literally we sat down next to each other, didn't we? And you were like, or maybe we were getting coffee or something. But I remember the feeling that you give people is like
Yeah, that's nice.
warmth and
Yeah.
very much like I want to get to know you and I'm listening to you and
Yeah.
I've got questions for you.
I always find like I might use all my nap at work because in my private life, I just want to be left alone. I feel like I use it all up in the day. I'm just like, oh, don't, all this. Anyway.
No, I do think there is a quota. I think you're right.
Pretty-
People
yeah,
talk about
pretty-
that social sell by date, don't they?
That's
I think
interesting.
that there's like a quota for how much you can turn that switch
Yeah,
on. Yeah.
that's really okay. Well, let's crack on then to this. What I think is for me the interesting, one of the most interesting ones, and this is this ignition point. So this is a point that something's happened to you in the past where it's made an impact on you, where you're demonstrably different afterwards. And this gives us a bit of an insight into how do these people that, and whether you like it or not, will revere you and kind of, love you, so to speak. Um, and so we're interested in how you got to this place. So what was your first ignition point that you thought of?
So I thought about this from a teaching perspective, and I basically the first school I joined was having some serious challenges. Leadership and behaviour were particularly acute kind of challenges. And I think the first thing that sort of sprung to mind is how, like, I think that's completely shaped my beliefs and my career choices. And I think so many people also have this as an ignition point of like seeing a school, either being part of a school or having your child at a school, whatever it is, where behaviour is not good enough and it's actually unsafe for the kids, and it just sticks with you. It's like you will almost do anything to stop that from being the case in the school that you work in or the school that your child goes to. And so I think that seeing like kids that do not respect authority because that authority isn't always worth respecting because they're not being consistent and they're not dealing with things properly. It's really stuck with me, and it's really annoyed me in a good way, because now I feel like I'm working to not let that happen. That's not going to be, when I train, like, work with teachers, we're not going to let that happen. Their practice is going to be really good and they're going to feel really confident. And when I went to work at Teach First, these brand new teachers have no idea how to manage behaviour. And it is one of the biggest concerns that they have. And we would work so hard and focus. And I would almost, to the point where I would almost like ditch other modules to go over and over this with them. Because if you just don't get it right, kids don't learn anything. And I couldn't affect leadership in the school in my role that I was in, but I could affect like how they could create these kind of like microcosms of calm in their classroom. So I think that just that working in that environment that I would say was unsafe, kids weren't learning, that was a kind of ignition point for me. And then afterwards, that's what's led to
But something you just said then, and to give the listeners a bit of an insight into why I want to talk to Sarah as much as possible, is that she, without knowing it, uses these phrases that she might have made up. I don't know if she makes them up, but microcosms of calm will be the thing that I take away, and there will definitely be a launchpad about that. But yeah, whenever I listen to Sarah at conferences and stuff like that, always come away with phrases. One I don't think we're going to talk about today, but one of my favorites was examined experience, and that stuck with me. But yeah, I think that's really interesting as a launchpad, as a kind of ignition point, sorry. And it's quite common, I think, that people experience something that's negative and then that spurs them on to make sure that no one else has to, if possible, ever have to kind of do that. I get that a lot now working with disadvantaged students. It just breaks your heart. Think it's not fair. I don't want anyone to ever do that.
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, well, let's go on to the next one. As I said, for those that are new to the podcast, the third element that we kind of go through, which then repeats itself, is this idea of a launch pad. And if you haven't seen it so far, I've kind of pulled together 100 of these launch pads that I've been making over the last year and a half, just kind of to help me learning into a book. And it's called Leadership Launchpads. And Sarah was kind enough to kind of have a look at it, do a review of it, and lovely. Sent me some pictures recently of her small. How old is your boy now?
He's like 1.5.
1.5, flicking through it, and it's turned into like a colouring book, which is great. And so what we do is beforehand we ask the speakers to select 2 of these that resonate with them, and then typically what we do is I talk through where I was when I made it, and we ask obviously the guests to say why it resonates with them. So the first one that Sarah chose was this idea of going off plan but staying with purpose. And when I made this kind of launchpad, this was what I was thinking. This idea that kind of adaptation and innovation do require lots of divergent thinking. We can't have that at the expense of the end goal. So it's okay to be innovative and kind of diverse and go off on tangents, but we have to keep one eye on the end goal. And so the launchpad ended up being created a bit like this, that there is a pathway to the goal, so to speak, but what sits outside that is a bit of space and a bit of flexibility where people can move. And when I started first thinking about it, I thought, what would make the core? And I thought, well, I guess you could have things like success criteria, or a phrase that we use quite commonly now, active ingredients, or things that make stuff work that you cannot mess with if you want it to continue to work. And then, of course, the natural thing is for anybody who works in any organization or any human, I suppose, that we shouldn't deviate from our ethics and our values. They should stay core. But there are some things that kind of, can be changed and should be changed. I think we talk a lot in my trust about this idea of deliberate differences. What are you doing deliberately different to meet the context of your kids or whatever situation you're in? And when I did the Launchpad, I thought about things like, the staffing could be different, the techniques you use could be different. I mean, there's nothing to say that the process has to stay the same. Your use of resources might differ. Just pure logistics, you can go off piece to do something slightly different with that. And then who you give the responsibility can change as well. And so that was where I was with the Launchpad. But why did it resonate with you, Sarah?
Yeah, I love that. And I love the people are watching this, like the image that you've used for it is really powerful to have that kind of core running through it. Yeah, and I really like the way because you work across a lot of schools, you have to be thinking, don't you, about those different deliberate differences. That's a phrase that I will be stealing. I promise to credit you, Chris. So that's a really good phrase. Yeah, I really like this one. The reason I really like it is because it really fits into some current work I'm doing on a book on coaching with Hailey Hughes and Adam Colbert around coaching for adaptive expertise. And in one of the papers on adaptive expertise, Ward et al. Talk about go off plan but stay with intent. They should have used purpose for the alliterative elements of it, but they that was their phrase. And it really captures like the reality of working in a complex system. You're working with human beings, you're working in a complex environment where things move in different directions. It's not always predictable. You can't do things in exactly the same way. There's no actual kind of blueprint for how to do this, step by step in any way at leadership or even at teaching, even though we have these techniques that you can kind of master and try to make automatic. There are always little changes that you need to make for when we say context, we mean not just kind of when you're planning lessons, but also in the moment, what's happening. So even something that's really predictable, like a countdown to get students' attention. Great teachers do that ever so slightly differently, depending on whether the kids in front of them are finishing their sentence or finishing a conversation or whatever it is. They'll give a little bit more time, a little bit less time. They'll use their voice slightly differently if they notice that the room, that people aren't listening to them. And it's just these micro differences. And that is really, going off plan, going off the routine slightly, perhaps, but staying with the goal, staying with that purpose and intent. And it's just that notion is really powerful, I think, for this idea of adaptive expertise.
Yeah.
I also just want to make a slightly wider point, which is Chris, your book is great. It's so useful. Like, this is a really good example, but it's so useful for coaching as well, because you can flick to ideas, different ideas that people might be talking about. It's like these kind of little windows into bigger worlds, your book. And I just, really recommend it to anyone who's kind of wanting these powerful ways of thinking about things.
Well, that's great. I really appreciate it. And it's funny you said that, because another phrase that you kind of put into my head was this idea of case concept coupling, and for me, that's how I use the book now when I coach, a bit like what you suggested, really. I've got it next to me all the time. And during a coaching session, someone will present a case or, their what's happening with them. For instance, I know somebody might say, oh, I don't think I'm getting my staff, they're not being honest enough. And I'll say, oh, that's interesting. Have you heard of psychological safety? And they say, no, I haven't. And I say, oh, well, let's have a look at this. This might help. And then I'm quiet, really, because the picture does the work for me when they go, that is exactly what I'm thinking. And suddenly the coupling of the concept of psychological safety and their case adds another layer to it and awakens things. But yeah, fascinating stuff. Okay. Well, let's keep cracking on with this, because I'm really keen to hear your off-the-cuff response to this next Fast Friends question that you might not have prepared for, which might be the new thing. Maybe we should not even let people prepare. This could be the new format. So the second question that Sarah picked was this idea, of, is there something that you've dreamed of doing for a long time? And then I guess the vulnerable bit is, why haven't you done it already?
Yeah. It's just something I've dreamed of for a long time. I think what I always think, this is coming back to me now. I think I was thinking about going traveling and doing some traveling. And then why haven't I done it? I think I keep finding reasons not to do it. Having a 1.5-year-old, I thought was a good reason, but actually loads of friends used their mat leave to go take the kid and go traveling, because it's free to take your kid on a plane when they're under 2 or something, and you've not got to take annual leave if you're on mat leave. So why didn't I do it? So I do think why haven't I done it? I think that there's an anxiety around breaking the routine a little bit. I do thrive on routine, perhaps more than most. And there's always a concern around what if everything goes to pot, and I don't think I feel very capable with practical things, if I'm honest, getting the child to the airport and being on a plane with them and all that kind of jazz. So I think I have held myself back from something that I would love to do, which is go to see lots of different countries. And it's one of those things where I really should do it, Chris, but I know.
Yeah. But I think there's, and we can extrapolate that a little bit, really, that a lot of times, things that feel, we don't typically, as adults, need to push ourselves out of our comfort zones. We're not forced to anymore by a parent or a teacher or anything like that. So it's quite nice to kind of find a little nice groove and to sit in it and those sorts of things. And the traveling thing makes me laugh. I don't know if I'll have to flip the roles one day so I can talk about my ignition points. But one that'll make you laugh. In that I went over to America and did a summer camp, in my 20s. And it's the first time I'd been abroad. And after the camp, some of the other guys were like, oh, do you want to come traveling with us? We're going, and it was in Pennsylvania. We're going to Miami. And I was like, oh, no, I'm going back to my mum. I've got, I'm going straight home. This is it, This was enough for me. And he said, oh, come on. And I'd said no. And then overnight I thought, maybe I should try, And I remember vividly turning up with them to the Amtrak train station and being kind of fourth in line, the fourth lad sort of thing. And each time I thought, what do I say when I get there? What do I, And so I just listened to the guy in front and he said, oh, can I have a ticket to Miami? And I thought, oh, that sounds quite straightforward. So I said the same thing. She said, yep. And so I gave her some money. And then literally 48 hours later, we were all on Miami Beach sort of thing. I thought, oh, well, that was easier than I thought it was.
Yeah.
We won't get into this now, but that started 6 years of solo traveling.
My gosh.
I went traveling after that for 6 years, almost non-stop. I just did summer camp and did all kinds of crazy stuff. And that really was almost, an ignition point for me, because
That's
it was
crazy,
the first
yeah.
time that I thought, I am really, really scared, but I'll do it. And then because nothing negative happened, I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll try something like that again. Anyway,
And you did it for
so there we
6
go.
years. That's incredible.
It was
I
cool, yeah.
really love your point about like when you get to be an adult, there's no one really pushing you out of like actually pushing you out of your comfort zone. I didn't really think about it like that. But you're right. Like you have to do your own
Thing.
pushing, really, don't you? Oh, I've got a moment of this coming up as well where I have to talk about this with you after this podcast. But that's pretty inspirational actually, because yeah, I think it's really important that not only do we push ourselves out of our comfort zone as adults, but we model to kids how to do the same thing. Because this is the thing, we always want kids to do things that we don't do ourselves. Come on, make mistakes and get over it, is what we say to them.
Yeah.
You learn from them. And then as adults, when we make mistakes, we beat ourselves up and try and stop them from happening again. Like we need to do more of that. Yeah.
And again, to go slightly off piece, and in July, I've got a kind of what my son would call a proper book coming out it's on self-efficacy, which is what my doctorate's in. But in the book, I talk about this thing called a self-efficacy circle.
Mm-hmm.
So this imaginary circle around you, where the things you're not confident to do sit outside, and the ones you are confident to do sit inside.
Mm-hmm.
And the further out they are, the less confident you are. And what we want to try and do as adults or anybody is to reach outside our circle, because once you do something that's outside your circle, the circle then expands to include that.
Yeah, lovely, great.
And so at the moment, your kind of solo travel with your baby is outside the circle.
Oh, way outside, yeah.
If you did it, it would suddenly come inside, and
you're so right.
All kinds of stuff. All right, let's keep.
I know, I love that because just to say, it fits with the theme of your book, which is making things visual in a really nice way that cuts through to the meanings really quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next thing to talk about is your second ignition point. So something else that happened to you that caused a shift in a positive kind of way, hopefully. So tell us a bit about that one.
Yeah, this one is a positive way actually, which is good. So when I actually worked at Teach First, I had a manager who I'd never experienced a manager like this before. And she's a friend of mine now, I'm happy to say. But Chris, she was an incredible manager. She was one of those people who had such high expectations of her. She coupled that high expectations, high support.
Nice. Basically.
So we had like the high challenge, high support thing in the team. So even though the standards of the organisation were reasonably high, her standards were higher. Yeah, but it wasn't like beating you around the head with it. Lots of support, and she was like vulnerable in a really good way. If she didn't know something, she'd be like, "Don't know it, gonna go and find out for you," and she would find out, even if it meant jumping through a lot of hoops. She would find out. So she had this incredible professional kind of credibility, and we all just really respected her. But she pushed us to be so much better than we were. Our team like outperformed all the other teams. Like we were really, because we were doing such important work training teachers, but we felt so proud of it. We were really this hugely united. It was just the best team I've ever been in, and well, maybe not the best team I've ever been in actually, because I've had great managers after that. But it was the first time I'd been in a team that really like everything just worked really, really well, and she was just such a fantastic manager. So that was a point. And the reason I say that is because the kind of after this ignition point, it really instilled in me the importance of having high expectations of your team and of yourself. And I know that sounds so trite, but there's so many times where you can convince yourself that you're doing things good enough. It's good enough. It's good enough. And sometimes it is good enough, and you don't want to burn out, right? Get it. But there's other times where you're like, actually, I need to hold myself to a higher standard here. What is that higher standard? And look for that higher standard. And that's why I loved working in teams like at Ambition, because there was always that higher standard, that model available to you of that person who was working at that higher level, thinking in a different way for you to aspire to as well. So that manager, she really, she's fantastic person. She just really embodied those like values and those high expectations that I think like made it's every piece of work I do, I really commit genuinely to doing my absolute best at what I'm doing, and I think in large part due to that model.
Amazing, isn't it? And it's funny how these things they're reoccurring, aren't they? Like if you think about when we interview trainee teachers and we say, "Oh, why do you want to become a teacher?" They talk about, "I had an amazing teacher."
Yeah.
And it's not dissimilar, is it? People who then become leaders had amazing leaders.
Yes.
And so I don't think we need to, if you move out of teaching and into leadership or, dual role, you shouldn't forget that you're now being that person potentially, for someone else.
Yes.
And we got, when Sam Gibbs was on, episode 1 and talked about, sadly, some toxic leadership experiences. And so for some people, it's not a positive thing. And yeah, okay, that's interesting. So
yeah, I think Sam is a really good example of someone who embodies values and principles that you would want to emulate in a leader. Yeah.
Amazing. So the next thing is the second Launchpad. And for this one, Sarah's chosen self-talk. And so again, I'll kind of do a brief intro to it and then we can ask her why it resonated with her. So the title of this Launchpad was Pushing Past Empty Self-Talk. And the idea was that we know, I think most of us, that self-talk has a significant impact on confidence. But a lot of times it's full of superficial statements. And that might not be as effective as we think. And I wrote it because I'd never heard of interrogative self-talk before. And like most of the Launchpads, I'm in a conference or reading a book and think, oh, I've never heard of that word before. And then have to go back and kind of Google it or now AI it and learn about it and then create the Launchpad to help me understand it. And so I guess for most people, they're familiar with the idea of positive self-talk. And that would be, statements like, I have the power to change, or I can get through this, or, other positive affirmations or statements. And of course, in contrast to that, you've got that negative self-talk, which again, people sadly probably have more going on than they should do. And when we've got negative self-talk, we tend to personalize situations and we blame ourselves, or we have this kind of like polarizing thought process where we're working at the extremes of things. We tend to, when we're, have got a lot of negative self-talk, focus on all of the negative stuff. We tend to be blind to the positives. And then something I've become worse at, I think, as an adult, is this catastrophizing, taking really small events and making them like, bigger than they are, and allowing my own kind of tapes in my head to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we might get into this, but having a coach is the way out of that for me. But anyway, that's an obvious kind of dichotomy, I suppose, or a way of classifying self-talk. But one of the ones that was new to me was this idea of declarative versus interrogative. And so declarative meaning obviously to make a declaration, and that's pretty much what positive and negative self-talk usually is. It's a statement. It's either I can do this or I can't do this. And the stuff I was reading was talking about this idea that maybe we should have more of a balance of making statements but also asking questions. So it introduced this idea of interrogative self-talk. Rather than telling yourself stuff, you ask yourself questions. And so rather than saying, I can do this task or I can't do this task, maybe we should ask ourselves, can I complete the task? And so the research I was reading talks about this idea that the power of this interrogative self-talk comes in the fact that you have to then take further action after it. So it's not a kind of, momentary increase in self-talk. Because those, if you know yourself, those can be quite easily dismissed. because you think, oh, yeah, you always say that, or you put a bit of positive stuff up, and then instantly the negative comes up and cancels it out. And so this was suggesting that, if I ask myself, can I complete this task? I then have to find evidence to support that. And in the process of finding the evidence, it strengthens and adds more credibility to what would have been just as kind of an empty statement. So interesting stuff. Why did it resonate with you, Sarah?
I love that. I love the way you took us through that as well. Yeah, this resonated with me because for a few reasons. One is like, sometimes we can be so blind to our self-talk, and if we actually were aware of it, we'd realize that within the first hour of waking up in the morning, we've beaten ourselves up about 20 different things and been really unkind to ourselves, which is often how this self-talk, I think, manifests in people, is like telling ourselves off. And as you know, Chris, I'm really interested in the brain and in neuroscience, and this really fits well, I think, with Daniel Willingham's memory as the residue of thought. I believe that our memories are kind of who we are. Like, without our memories, we've ceased to be like who we are, which sadly we see when some people have some kind of degenerative conditions. So if our memories are the residue of thought, and we are spending hours and hours each day telling ourselves that we're crap and that we could do better, and, oh, you can't do this, and that's outside of your circle, and like, you're rubbish at this, you're rubbish at that, you've upset this person, what about if this person's cross with me? If that's our self-talk, then that's the memories that we're forming. That's the ideas that we're forming about ourselves. That's our self-concept. And that affects everything, because that becomes who we are. It also becomes the lens through which we see situations. And I also, kind of a slight side note, this is what I think sometimes is meant by karma. So, for example, like, when we colloquially use the term karma, of like, that bad karma, if you cheat on someone, if you're unfaithful to them, if you're a bad friend to somebody in some particular way, like you talk behind their back, or whatever it is, you form this kind of image of friendship as being like that. And you start to see other people through that lens. So you start to suspect your partner of cheating on you, or you start to suspect your friends of bitching about you, etc., etc. And I think that we can't kind of underestimate this self-talk aspect to us. It's part of what makes us human. But what I really love about what you've done in this book is, it's like, essentially, how do we become more aware of it? How do we slow it down and take control of it? It's always there, but how can we harness it and make it better? And I think we could all do with this. And sometimes we don't really have the space for it. And that's why I think you've mentioned coaching as being quite a good way to do this. So I just want to throw that back on you around kind of what you meant by coaching helping you with
well,
this.
I mean, both, obviously me and you are both really passionate about coaching for everybody, for teachers, for leaders, for ourselves. And I mean, I remember reading this probably 10 years ago now, you read it, the chimp paradox,
Yeah.
And that idea that, we have this kind of like almost a negative or a very strong emotional voice in our head, and we have a more human kind of rational side. But I think without the help of someone else, it's very easy for our chimp to overwhelm us all the time. And for me, even as I alluded to earlier, this kind of outwardly facing confidence is not how I feel inside. I have a very negative chimp who talks very loudly most of the time, and I'm able to, put him back in his box most of the time, but sometimes I need some help. And for me, I find coaching is really helpful with that, because in a situation where I say, oh, I'm not sure I can do that, they say, why do you think that? And then I unpick it, and then they present evidence to disregard that, and then suddenly, I'm back in a more positive state. But it's fascinating. All right, but let's get on to the last part of today. The weather seems to be hitting us hard today. And
Yeah. Can you hear the rain? I hope you
I
can't.
can hear it, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I can hear it here as well. I'm sure it's just people who listen back to this, it'll be on a summer's day, and they'll be like, "What?" So the last bit of the session today is really Sarah's final question that she chose, And so I'll put it up so she can have a good read of that one. This is probably one of the most vulnerable ones, which would be interesting to hear about. But yeah, she chose, when did you last cry in front of another person?
Yeah,
I
I found all of these were difficult to pick between these ones, and I felt like this was um, perhaps the best one to choose. But yeah, it is actually now I'm feeling very bummed.
what? I thought you were going to say, if you've got like a 1-year-old, you cry in front of them all the time.
He cries in front of me all the time. He's always having a crying fit. I think that well, I know the last time I cried was when basically my son he's been a fantastic sleeper, but for the last few weeks he has been waking up in the night, and it's hard, Chris, isn't it, when you're on very little sleep, just to cope with things. So I cried over something very little, but it was basically because I was just hugely sleep deprived. And I always think when I get like this, because he has these obviously periods, it's natural, isn't it, to bad sleep. And I can't get back to sleep. That's the problem. Like I'll get him, you get him up, give him a cuddle, he goes back to sleep, like, you know, and then you're up for 5 hours, like, damn it, why did he do this? And I always think about like basically essentially teachers and others who have to like put their game face on all day with a lack of sleep.
Yeah.
And I also had that. Like, I used to cry all the time when I was pregnant. I think the hormones plus just being knackered, and the anxiety of being pregnant, really. But I used to just think about these teachers that had to then go in and put that game face on, and how brave that was. And maybe it's a good distraction, but it's also got to be really difficult when you're having that bad day, when you haven't slept. I am on the verge of tears all the time when I haven't slept. Everything tips you over the edge. So I think for me, lack of sleep was the last time I cried. But lack of sleep generally, Chris, is like my kryptonite.
I think there's definitely some wider learning in that, and I think as leaders we need to be super sensitive to out of the, you know, as uncommon responses from the people that we lead, because they might be a window into a bigger issue. You know, if the photocopier is jammed and someone starts crying, you probably need to ask a few more questions. You know, there's probably some other stuff going on behind the scenes that is literally just the tipping point. And it's worth, you know, again, taking a coaching approach and just checking in with them.
That's such a sensible insight. That looking out for those uncommon reactions and what might be behind that, and kind of not. I think there's something I was reading about a little while ago, which was like, say how you feel in meetings when people say like, how is everyone today, rather than going, oh yeah, fine, you know, the British sort of thing.
Yeah.
Saying like, I'm all right, but I'm actually had a bit of a sucky morning, like this happened and this happened, so if I'm not 100% today, that might be why. And like not take it as like people making excuses to themselves, just take it as people being honest and upfront about their life, basically, because people are people aren't the role that they are.
No,
they're also human beings.
That's so funny. That makes me I'm old enough and kind of uncaring enough to just say how I feel all the time. When people say, oh, hey Chris, how are you? I tell them exactly what it was. And
it's good.
One sticks in my mind at the beginning of last term where I was at the photocopier again and someone said, hey Chris, how are you? I said, struggling with some mental health stuff at the moment. And they went, okay, do you want to talk about it? And I said, well, no, I'm working through it, but yeah, if you've got 5 minutes. And what a great environment to be able to feel like you can say that. And really fun.
But also you're a role model. Like, I mean, everyone's a role model really, but like you and your position particularly set the tone, set the weather, don't you? So that's just to hear that you've said that. I can imagine if I was your member of staff, I would be like, okay, this makes it okay to talk about.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
fascinating. Well, we have, sadly for me at least, come to the end of our session. So just to say, you know, thanks to Sarah, obviously if you want to get in contact with her, she's all over the socials. What other stuff have you got going on at the moment, Sarah?
I'm really into sort of sharing great models of coaching teachers. I don't think there's enough models out there. So I've got a Substack, Cognitive Coach Substack with Adam Colbeck, where we're doing very short clips of great coaching, which we're like quickly kind of decomposing, so that if coaches or leaders of coaching in school want like a quick bit of CPD for their coaches, then that comes out weekly. And we have been blessed with just over 800 subscribers. So we're hoping to push towards the 1,000 subscribers to really get some good model examples out there. So yeah, love if you're a listener and you want to learn more about coaching, if you sign up to the Substack Cognitive Coach.
Well, we'll put all the links in the kind of, the bio of this episode. And I think that brings us full circle as well, because as I said earlier on, that idea of examined experience that Sarah kind of gave me is the game changer, because you can be a coach, and yes, you'll probably get better by being a coach. But if you invest in examining your coaching and in subscribing to things like Sarah's suggesting and leaning into it and observing and deconstructing, your progress will be infinitely more kind of, rapid. If you've liked what we've talked about today, the podcast is on all the various places. And if you want to get involved in the book, you can kind of click the QR code. A bit like Sarah, kind of happy to chat with anybody on the socials. So thanks to everyone for listening. And we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you very much, Chris.